Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you. I'm Kelly Testy from AALS, and I'm just going to let everyone kind of have a minute to come on in to the webinar. Again, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the launch of the AALS study of American Law School faculty. And we are really pleased to present this webinar today to give you insights into some of the study's findings and to hear analysis and conversation both from the research leader who launched this project and also from our president and two leading faculty members in the US. So I want to let you know a little bit about how we'll proceed and introduce our moderator and panelists, and then we'll get right into this. So we have with us today Katie Kempner, who works with AALS as a director of research and takes on a lot of major research projects for us, including this one. And this is a first of its kind study of law school faculty. We intend to use this as a launching pad to maintain even more robust data about the legal academy and to help us all understand the trends in law school faculty that we need to know to be able to properly move forward together. So Katie, I'm really pleased you're with us today. And as I welcome you, I want to give a big shout out to Judy Areen. Judy Areen was my predecessor as the CEO and executive director of AALS. And Judy worked tirelessly to help bring this project to fruition. So huge thanks to you, Katie, and to Judy Areen. We also have with us today Melanie Wilson, the current president of AALS, who will serve as our moderator. She is the dean at Washington and Lee and a wonderful leader for legal education. So Melanie, welcome. We're really happy to have you with us today for this exciting launch. And then I want to welcome Brian Leiter, who is here from the University of Chicago, one of the leading voices on law school faculties within the U.S. and has been so helpful in helping us understand who's coming into the academy and how to get there. And so, Brian, not only for your own scholarly and teaching work, but for the way you've helped mentor so many, we thank you and are just honored that you're with us today. Welcome. I'm also equally delighted to welcome Dean Angela Onwuachi-Willig from Boston University, who is not only one of our nation's leading scholars, but who has also helped mentor so many people coming into the legal academy, especially through the Ludi Scholars. And so, Angela, I want to welcome you today and thank you for the great work you've done to bring more equity into the legal academy and just how you've served as such an effective mentor to so many. So with that, I am so pleased to say welcome, and I want to greet you all and thank all of you who are attending here today. We're so pleased that you've been able to be with us and have interest in this area. As I've said, we'll intend to, after today, use this as a base to do even more data collection and distribution and understanding for the Legal Academy. Katie, with that, I'm going to turn to you and thank you and ask you to give us an overview of this project and what you found.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kelly. If you will just give me one moment to share my screen, and if someone will just give me a nod when you can see the presentation, that would be great. Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly. So hi, everyone. I am, as Kelly mentioned, Katie Kempner, the Associate Director of Research here at AALS. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today to hear more about our most recent research project, the American Law School Faculty Study. I will start today by giving a brief overview, description of the study, and then I'll just go through some key takeaways, which we think really represent some of the most important findings from this report. I will then turn it over to Dean Wilson to moderate our panel discussion with our wonderful panelists that Kelly just introduced. And I will note just a couple of housekeeping items. We will have a few minutes at the end of our session today to take questions from the audience. So as we go through this session, feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions you have as we go along. And I did see a question come through asking about the recording. We are recording today, and we will be sending out a link to this recording for anyone who needs to jump off early or anyone who couldn't make it today. So with those couple of notes, let's go ahead and get started. And as we get started, I really want to make sure we thank the Access Lex Institute for their sponsorship of this project. Without their support, this important research really would simply not be possible. So we're so grateful for their support there. So our American Law School faculty study is based on two surveys. Both were fielded in the fall of 2023 by our research partners at NORC at the University of Chicago. There was an individual level survey for law faculty and a school level survey filled out by deans or their representatives at the law schools. For the individual survey, all tenure track, tenured long-term contract faculty and deans were from ALS member and paid schools were invited to participate. And of course, all ALS schools were invited to participate in the school level survey as well. We ended up with almost 1,900 responses from individual faculty members for about a 23% response rate among faculty, and 117 deans filled out the school level survey on behalf of their law schools for a 61% response rate. And we were aiming to answer the research questions that you see listed here. And I think these also speak to the themes of the key findings that I'll highlight here for you today. So we'll take a look at some characteristics of law school faculty, their career pathways, job responsibilities and time allocation, job satisfaction among law faculty, as well as some hiring trends over the last several academic years. So with those details all mentioned, let's move on to our findings. So to start off, we were interested in looking at the changing demographics of law faculty when we first started this project. And we found that in general, law faculty are becoming more diverse in terms of gender. We can see here that women comprise the majority of law faculty entering the profession over the last 20 years. Our study also found that a lower proportion, 42%, of tenured faculty are women, and a greater proportion of clinical and legal writing faculty are women, between about 60 and 75%, depending on the position type. We also found that law faculty are becoming more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity. Here we can see that Hispanic faculty and faculty of color comprise 37% of newer faculty who started teaching within the last 5 years, compared to smaller proportions of more experienced law faculty. So with more Hispanic faculty and faculty of color entering law teaching more recently, it follows that a higher percentage of tenure track faculty, that's about 42%, are Hispanic or faculty of color, compared with 25% of tenured faculty. So while we see this generally increasing diversity among law faculty in terms of gender and race and ethnicity, there are other ways in which law faculty are not as diverse. For example, we found that the majority of law faculty have at least one parent with an advanced degree. So a total of 56% of law faculty reported having a parent with a law degree or another advanced degree. And that compares to about a fifth of current law faculty whose parents did not earn a bachelor's degree. So that 22% of first generation college graduates are really in the minority among law faculty. Along the same lines, our study found that 71% of law faculty overall earned their JD from one of the most selective law schools, and that's based on the median LSAT scores of the entering first year class. This trend, as we see here, is even stronger among faculty who teach at the most selective schools. 89% of those faculty members earned their JD from a most selective law school. And I think it's interesting to note that still over half of faculty at selective schools earned their JD from a most selective law school. So again, while we generally see increases in diversity in terms of race and ethnicity and gender, we don't necessarily see that happening with the first generation college graduates coming into law teaching, and we're still seeing a concentration of law professors earning their JDs from the most selective schools. Turning now to career pathways, one of the things we asked faculty members who filled out the individual survey about was what other degrees they have in addition to their JD. we found that newer faculty are more likely to have additional advanced degrees in addition to the JD. So overall, 45% of law school faculty earned a master's or a doctorate degree in addition to their JD. And those newer faculty members who earned their JDs since 2010 were even more likely to have an additional advanced degree. So 57% of that group had a master's or a doctorate in addition to the JD. I'll note here there are many more findings in this report on career pathways, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those in our panel discussion, but this stood out to me to present today, and there's lots more on this topic in the full report. Turning now to some findings on scholarship and tenure, we were interested in faculty perceptions of their law school culture when it comes to scholarship. So we found that 80% of law faculty agree their law school has a culture that encourages scholarship. And we see here this is especially true at the most selective institutions where 94% of faculty agreed with this statement. We also asked faculty about their perceptions of the tenure system. So overall, 65% of faculty said the tenure system was very valuable. And it makes sense that those who are eligible for tenure are going to be more likely to say that it's valuable. You can see that in the chart on this slide. Our study found that 44% of law schools extend tenure eligibility to clinical faculty and 26% to legal writing faculty. And we see here that both of those groups are less likely to say that tenure is valuable, along with long-term contract faculty who might not be eligible for tenure. Shifting now to take a look at job responsibilities and time allocation, we found, not unexpectedly, that 69% of faculty ranked teaching as their most important job responsibility, with 21% indicating scholarship is their most important responsibility. And in conjunction with this, we also asked faculty what they spend the most time on, and they also answered scholarship and teaching. So there's this alignment between what law faculty see as their most important job responsibilities and how they're allocating their time. And perhaps this alignment is one of the reasons why job satisfaction among law faculty is so high. 74% of law faculty overall report being satisfied or very satisfied with their current positions, and this holds across all position types. So those cover some of the key findings from our individual survey. And just before I wrap up today, I want to take a quick look at findings on hiring, which come from our school level survey. Our study showed that since the 2019 academic year, there has been a consistent increase in the proportion of law schools hiring faculty across position types. We can see here that the 2022 to 2023 academic year was really a banner year for hiring across position types. So we see most law schools hired at least one tenured faculty member and at least one tenure track faculty member in that year. And I'll just add here, and this echoes something Kelly said at the top of our program here, but as we think about our research agenda going forward, trends in faculty hiring and career pathways are on our list of priorities, so we expect to do more work in this area going forward. As I mentioned, we have so much more detail on these findings and more in the full report. But I want to turn it over to Dean Melanie Wilson and our wonderful panelists for what I'm sure will be a very interesting discussion. So thank you so much, and I'll turn over to Melanie.
Katie, thank you so much. I want to thank, as Kelly did, you and Judy Areen for continuing to shepherd this really important study, and certainly to our friends at NORC, the research team there that actually carried it out, and then, of course, Access Lex Institute, without which we couldn't have pursued this study. I also want to go back, and for those of you, many of you know Kelly Testy from whether she was a dean. She's picked up the baton from Judy Areen as executive director and CEO and seen it through seamlessly. And I want to give a big shout out to her for ensuring that all the great work that goes on at AALS, including the great work that the staff do, has continued to go on just seamlessly. So I want to point that out. The other thing, I think Kelly put this in the chat, but if you have questions, we're going to have time at the end for some questions. So if as they occur to you, please put them in the chat and we'll come back to that. I want to make a couple of comments and really reflections, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleagues who are going to give some reflections. The first thing I want to say is that, you know, this faculty study I think is so important. As a dean, I've been a dean at a couple of law schools. I think we always know that the law faculty are so critical to the great success and ongoing adaptability of law schools. The AALS has done research on students, prospective students. The AALS has done studies on deans, and this really does help us understand the most important piece, this faculty piece. And I'm so happy that we're going to continue to look at that because it is so important. I think as deans especially, we have thoughts about how our faculty are feeling and what they're doing and what they're valuing, but the study actually shows whether we have those intuitions correct. All right, so I really have 3 quick observations I want to make, and then I'll turn it over to Professor Leiter. The first one is, I guess I'm an optimist, and so Katie talked about the fact that as we diversify the faculty, still most faculty, a large percentage of faculty, I think it was 71% overall, come from the most selective schools, go to the most selective law schools. And I actually see this as a little bit different. When I was in law school, when I practiced law, when I got into academia, the message, at least that I heard, was that if you did not go to a top 14 law school, the likelihood that anybody would break into law faculty teaching was just almost zero. And I think that's one thing that I'd heard. And the second thing I'd heard is that if you are a first generation college goer, that it's just almost impossible for you to break in. And so when I look at the fact that 71% went to the most selective law schools, I asked myself 2 questions. What does it mean to be the most selective law school? And at least in this study, it really is based on the LSAT scores. And so approximately, if we used US News or some other basic calculus, basically the top 50 schools would be in the maybe more than that, would at least be the most selective. And so there's a little bit more room there for people that go on to law teach than, at least in my mind, I had been hearing from various messages. So I find that a very positive message. Related to that, 47%, and I don't think Katie got to this particular thing, but 40% of the respondents in the study said that they had had a clerkship. And at least my perception before I broke into academia was that you basically had to have a clerkship. That is, it would be closer to 90. So that was a little bit of an interest to me. And with regard to first generation college goers, 22% of law faculty have parents who did not earn a bachelor's degree. That was actually higher than I thought it might be. So to me, that was interesting. So it's which side, is the glass half full, is the glass half empty, whatever the case may be. So that was really remarkable to me. The second observation I want to make, I was really pleased as a law dean that 74% of faculty that were surveyed indicated that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with their jobs. And that just feels really good. That's what we hope for. We'd like to have 100%, but I think, and that's overall, and in certain categories, it was even higher than that. And so that was really a positive development in my view. And then the final quick point that I'll make in order to just get us started, it was very interesting to me that we continue to diversify in terms of gender. But one of the disappointing, not surprising, but disappointing findings for me was that women continue to be underrepresented in positions of power in law schools. And so I think we should continue to ask ourselves, what's causing that? What's holding us back? What are the challenges there? What's really going on below that? So those are some of the things that struck me the most. There's so much great information in this study, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues to talk a little bit about that. And Professor Leiter, I'll ask for you to maybe give a few observations first.
Great. Thank you very much, Melanie. I'm actually going to pick up on a couple of things you said. I'm going to focus, there's a lot of fascinating data in this study, so I've only tagged a few things given my allotted time, and I'm going to focus, perhaps unsurprisingly, on pathways into law teaching. Like Dean Wilson, I was also struck by the data on the educational background of the parents of law teachers. Right? 22% did not graduate from college, but even more striking on the other side is 56% of law professors have a parent with either a law degree or a graduate degree of some kind, which also seems to me very high. And of course, nearly 80% have a parent who at least went to college, if not going on for these graduate degrees. One interesting research question, and sorry, Katie and Judy, for suggesting more work for you, but it would be interesting to know how this compares to other fields in the university. How does it compare to med school professors? How does it compare to professors in the social sciences? I don't know the answer to that, but it may be that the 22% who have a parent who didn't go to college is very unusual for law teaching, but I just don't know. Now, on the statistic about where law teachers went to school, I would like to suggest that the most selective category, and Dean Wilson actually noted this, it's a very broad category. And I have a feeling if we looked at more fine-grained data, it would look rather different. So the report says 71% of law faculty completed their JD at one of the most selective law schools, that is ones with a median LSAT of 165 or higher. 89% are employed, 89% at the most selective institutions got their degree from a most selective institution. About 15 years ago, someone did do a study using the AALS database, and it turned out that 25%, 1 out of 4 law faculty in the United States, went to 2 law schools, one near Boston, I forget the name, and one in Connecticut. I suspect it's not that different now. And that is my, it is an anecdotal sense, but it's a lot of anecdotes. So I have a feeling the concentration is much greater than these statistics suggest. Now, I will make a comment that I don't think this is that atypical for any field in the university. That is, the pattern in all disciplines, and I know about a few of them fairly well, is that almost all the researchers come from, 10 or 12 major programs, right? If there's a difference with law schools, right, it's that 2 law schools, whose names I can't remember, the 2 law schools have a disproportionate share. And I actually don't think that's particularly healthy for the legal academy, but that is a separate and bigger debate. The striking thing about pathways into law teaching has become very clear in recent years is the total number of candidates applying has collapsed relative to the past. When I was first doing appointments in the late 90s, there would be over 1,000 submissions in the FAR. Okay. Now, that wasn't a good thing because I would say this is just, a rough estimate. About half of them were not really serious contenders. That is, a lot of them were people who you kind of got the feeling that partnership decision was coming and they thought, oh, I'll do something that's easier. I'll go be a law professor. So there were a lot of not serious applications, but there were still 500 or 600 pretty serious applications. Of course, in recent years, it hasn't gotten above 400. Okay? It's been, roughly, it's in the 300s typically each year. Now, part of this is due, I think, to better information being available, but part of it is due to the phenomenon that you see in every field, which is credential inflation. Okay? And I don't know how to do anything about credential inflation. That is, once upon a time, I was chatting with Kelly Testy about this before we started, you could actually get a job in law teaching without having published an article. That is very hard to do now. Right. And moreover, as the study reports, right, 57% of faculty who earned their law degree between 2010 and 2023 had an additional advanced degree, right? And it gets even higher if you look only at the at classroom faculty, okay, as opposed to clinical faculty or legal research and writing faculty. And while 57% may have had some advanced degree, I'm going to bet money, again, based on the data that Sarah Lawsky has been collecting for a number of years about the junior hiring market, that the vast majority of those without the PhD or MA have done a fellowship or a visiting assistant professorship. Okay? All of which is to say that the path to getting into law teaching has gotten a lot longer than it was 30 odd years ago. And that is clearly going to have an effect on the class background of those who go into law teaching, because it's an expensive proposition, right? You might need to get a graduate degree. You might need to be pick up and move in order to take a fellowship for 2 years. So it's gotten much, much harder than it was. Again, I don't think this is atypical in law schools. Across the board, my other field in philosophy, faculty are always complaining that they get undergraduates applied to grad school who have publications now. And the common wisdom is a PhD student can't even think about getting a job unless they have publications while they're in grad school. That was not true 30 years ago. Okay. So it's part of a general trend. I think it's partly a function of another statistic that Katie mentioned and Melanie also mentioned, which is that law faculty are pretty happy with their job. And that means it's a desirable job. I was struck by the fact that clinical faculty and legal research and writing faculty were happier than tenured faculty at Deeds. But I have to believe that's because Deeds were in the mix and it depressed the happiness score. I'll let the deans speak to that if they want, but I think being a dean is hard. Harder than being a faculty member, let's put it that way. Because people are happy with the job, the competition is extremely stiff. And when the competition gets stiff, we get credential inflation, which means the path to getting into law teaching is much harder now than it was 30 years ago. And I don't think it's going to get easier. But, I won't, predictions of the future are always a fool's errand, so I won't say more about that. I think that's a good place to stop, and I'll turn it over to Angela. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your initial comments, and let me ask Dean Angela Onwuachi-Willig to give us her initial thoughts, and then we'll dialogue a bit.
Yeah, hi, hello everyone. I want to start by echoing all of the thanks that Kelly gave, and in particular thanking Kelly for really being a leader and a trailblazer in this area as well. I want to thank, of course, Judy Areen. I want to thank Katie Kempner, Melanie Wilson, and the entire AALS Executive Committee for really supporting and engaging in this study, which is so critical. I also want to thank everyone who filled out the survey, because it's a very long survey. I know it took time. Thank you for providing this information. I agree with Melanie that it's really, really important for us to understand who are the faculty that are teaching the next generation of lawyers and leaders. As a number of people have noted, it's super encouraging to see that law faculties are becoming increasingly more diverse in terms of race and gender and ethnicity, many other dimensions over the years. So for instance, when I joined the academy now more than 20 years ago, a study like this one would have not even included questions about the existence of transgender or non-conforming faculty. And today the study reveals that 5% of the faculty who responded to it identify as transgender or gender non-conforming. But before I offer comments about the study, I want to note a few points about the context in which I think we should be viewing and sort of analyzing some of these results. So first, I want to highlight that it's, the respondents, of course, are a little skewed in terms of who responded to the survey. The respondents in the survey were overwhelmingly white, 74% versus 26% of all other racial and ethnic groups. And that's even smaller than the percentage of white faculty overall, which is 79% of all law faculty are white faculty. And I think we have to keep this in mind with the fact that our student body is much, much more diverse now. White students comprise approximately only 60% of law students, which is almost 20% lower than the percentage of white faculty in the nation. I want to second say that the respondents tend to come from a relatively privileged point of view or relatively privileged group of faculty. So 77% of those who answered the survey are tenured and are on the tenure track, and 62% of the respondents were tenured. And if I were just looking at my own faculty, which I think might reflect the larger academic world, I would guess the division among all faculty is a little less skewed. So for instance, in my faculty, the division between tenure stream faculty and non-tenure stream faculty is roughly about 50-50. And we know that the perspectives of long-term contract faculty are particularly underrepresented in the survey, just from even the results there. And then third, and related to the privilege point, it's already been noted a number of times, law faculty tend to come even more from families that might be in the know. We know from other studies, just looking at faculty overall, the professors overall are up to 25 times more likely to have parents with a PhD. And we know that this rate even doubles. It might even double at the most prestigious universities. 56% of law faculty, as Brian pointed out, as opposed to 52% of the faculty from PhD granting departments have a parent with an advanced degree. So that tells you a little bit more about law faculty. And I think it also gives some context to the fact that both faculty earn their degree from one of the most selective institutions, which I think looking at the most recent rankings was like the top 45 law schools. And finally, I want to note that while we're celebrating the increased racial and ethnic diversity in hiring, it's just a context point, and I have more points, is that it's really just not the greater diversity in hiring is not just part of a sort of natural progress narrative. It's really the result of deliberate work that numerous organizations, collectives, individuals have taken on for really decades now. And these groups include people, none of which are restrictive by race, or include things like the SALT and LET Crit, which have for decades been holding a junior faculty development workshop to both help people get people to tenure and help people get into the market. The Ludi Lytle Black Women Law Faculty Workshop, almost 20 years strong now. The John Mercer Langston Black Men Law Faculty Workshop, the colloquium now that's at Harvard Law School, GoLila, or the Graciela Olivares Latinas in the Legal Academy Workshop, which centers on the experiences of Latinas in the Academy, the Asian, Pacific American, and Middle Eastern and North African Women Law Faculty Workshop. And then there are individuals like Catherine Smith at Dean Wilson's school, Washington and Lee University School of Law, who have been engaged in this outreach, working with individuals. I remember one year, Catherine even called every single person of color who was in the FAR Forum, back when the FAR Forum included like 1,000 people, and reached out to them about passing on. And she's now engaged in consulting work, and we've even hired her as a consultant who works with our VAPs at BU. And then there are people like a younger generation of people like Carlos Chapman, who's also very similarly engaged in all this work. And then relatedly, there is the workshop that Kelly Testi created decades ago to increase diversity among law deans. And we should take note that this hiring, the more diverse group of faculty that are being hired now, is also occurring when we have the most diverse group of deans ever in our history. And so I want to say all of these factors are the things under the context under which we should be looking at these data. And I would say that even our celebration of gender diversity among faculty has to be tempered somewhat. Melanie is the optimist, I'm less of the optimist. Women comprise the majority of law faculty entering the academy in the last 20 years, but that statistic is also shaped by the fact that women are disproportionately represented among long-term contract faculty and clinical faculty, and given the differences in terms of status, pay, job security, and other factors between tenure stream faculty and skills and clinical faculty, even when tenure stream, there are still meaningful questions about gender parity, I would say. I think it's also important to note that Hispanic and faculty of color are least likely to be working at the most selective law schools and most likely to be working at selective law schools. This phenomenon of clustering of faculty of color at the less selective and often less resourced law schools was really analyzed wonderfully by Professor Heriberto Roman in an article called Free Riders and Diversity in the Legal Academy, a New Dirty Dozens list in 2008. And if the same dynamic that he talked about more than 15 years ago is happening now, I think we have to ask ourselves why. And these data are even more startling when one considers, as the study pointed out, that faculty of color, for example, are also more likely to have a degree other than a JD. I would say that it's also good news, of course, that we're becoming more diverse, but the fact that faculty of color are also clustered among the youngest faculty suggests that it might be a while before we see the effects of that diversity. All of us know from being on faculties that as you gain more experience, as you develop your reputation more, you also gain more voice and more clout on your faculty among your faculty members who are the people who are making the policies. There were really, really interesting things about, a number have been mentioned about the pathways, but I want to highlight two. One of the things that was highlighted about doctrinal faculty is that the most common pathways for doctrinal faculty often involve clerkships, even though they were fewer faculty, like 40%, only 40% had clerkships. They are the most common pathway for people who are tenure stream doctrinal faculty. And also VAPs are increasingly a pathway. And those are really important for all the reasons that have been noted before. Number one, we know from lots of data that the people who are clerking, particularly at federal clerkships, is not a generally diverse group, that there's a dearth of clerks of color, in particular Black and Latinx clerks. With the VAPs, we know that there's a huge class bias, socioeconomic class bias involved. The lower salaries that it takes, the lower salaries that those positions often offer, you have to be in a position to be able to accept that lower salary, which means you have to have fewer obligations to your family or to your broader family. Less debt, all of those various things are shaping, I think, of course, the diversity of the faculty in other ways. And then there are numerous issues that were in the survey that related to status and service work, which are disproportionately performed by long-term contract faculty, and that, of course, is compounded by issues related to pay. In terms of surprises, I want to note a couple of things I think are really, really key. I was pleasantly surprised that the overwhelming majority of faculty respondents who were primarily tenure stream, indicated that teaching was their most important job responsibility. But there are a few related data that I think I want to highlight. First, the survey notes that white faculty and multiracial faculty are more likely than Hispanic and faculty of color to say that teaching is their most important responsibility. And importantly, the survey notes this might be the result of the fact that white faculty have been teaching longer. And if you're teaching longer, you're more likely to say that it was the most important part of your job. But I want to highlight another factor that I think might also be shaping that result. And I think it's the reality that as much as we all love our jobs as faculty, and it literally is the best job in the world, being a faculty member of color is a vastly different experience than being, I think, a white faculty member, and even more so when it comes to being a woman of color faculty. And we know a lot of this from Mira Deo's work, who some people have highlighted. So data from this survey reveal as much. So for instance, Hispanic and Black faculty are 1.5 times more likely than other faculty to spend more than a quarter of their time on service. Women are also nearly twice as likely as men to spend more than a quarter of time on service. And critically, Black faculty at 52% are more likely than more than 1.5 times more likely than white faculty to spend more than half of their time with their students, and Hispanic faculty spend more time, the most time, on student advising. These data really highlight, I think, the invisible work that a lot of faculty of color, particularly Black and Hispanic faculty, are engaging in, and I assume in many instances are receiving no formal service credit for or no other recognition for. And so it's important because although the majority of us highlighted that teaching is our most important responsibility, scholarship is still the coin of the realm in academia. It not only shapes the overall reputation of individual faculty members, it shapes their portability across law schools, it shapes the voice and clout that they may carry on their own particular faculties, it shapes the chairs, the professorships, the awards, the extra leaves, the merit badges, as Professor Michael Olivas called them, that faculty received, and ultimately it shapes the pocketbooks, the pay of law faculty. All of these realities are layered on top of a reality that I think a lot of faculty of color appreciate about being evaluated by different and often more questioning and critical standards that tend to discount accomplishments in some instances, as the Faithorpe lawsuit attacking enormously successful and amazing Black faculty at Northwestern Law School shows. And I think faculty appointments committees need to have this context in mind when they're looking at lateral candidates. When looking at and comparing different faculty members' productivity, we all have to consider the conditions under which that work was produced. And if it's even or greater, we have to understand exactly what that really took. Deans need to have this context when they're doling out service assignments and when they're determining merit raises. And deans need to have this context when thinking about the mentoring of faculty of color. I think that there are lots of everyday experiences that people are having to make very, very important strategic decisions about when they're faculty of color versus when they're not. And I think that gets underappreciated by a lot of senior faculty and deans. And I just think that the data sort of highlighted that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. Brian, we're going to open it up in a minute to the questions that anybody has in the audience, but I wanted to give you just a minute if you want to add to anything that Angela said or respond, or we can just go to questions. I'm sure the audience, you've given them a lot to think about, and I'm sure they have questions.
Yeah, I think we should open it up to those who are attending.
Fantastic. Kelly, I don't know if you've been able to monitor the questions that have been flowing in, but happy to hear if there are some for our panelists.
Yes, I have. There's been a lot of questions, and we've responded to many in the chat. I do want to just let the audience know, as I put there, that anything that you don't get answered today, or if you have further input, we really want to hear from you. So please be in touch with me and Katie. This is really the tip of the iceberg, a way for us to start. And I thought Brian and Angela's comments really helped make key points that we all need to be thinking about. Melanie, one of the questions there is a question around the flow of candidates into the Legal Academy, and whether Brian and Angela have thoughts about ways to make that pool larger, or thoughts about why it might have contracted a little. Hiring overall contracted a lot for legal education at a certain point. It's coming back up, but I think that might be one question if perhaps Brian and Angela could spend a little time with the reflections on how to keep the academy strong.
Brian, I know you raised that, so maybe you could go first and then Angela can chime in and add.
Sure. So, as I mentioned in my initial remarks, I think part of it is that the credential inflation. It's just harder, right? And that puts people with, otherwise very good credentials off because they don't have the time or the resources to acquire all the other credentials, right? I mean, I think this is especially true for people who married and have children, right? You can't just go bouncing around the country. It's not so simple to, take a fellowship here or whatever. Once upon a time when these fellowships and VAPs first started, this is now, I'm saying, about 25 years ago, the rationale for many of them was precisely to give an opportunity to people who hadn't had a chance to try to produce scholarship to do so. And now we can't, as it were, force law schools back into that model, but that's changed, right? That even programs that started that way have participated in the general credential inflation. The other thing, of course, is the private legal market has been booming for quite a while. Supreme Court clerks, as everyone is no doubt aware, get, shall we say, rather large bonuses, which bind them for at least 2 years. And once they're there 2 years, sometimes it continues. So there's a lot of forces at work here, and I'm not sure. I'm not really sure what we can do other than the kind of things that I do on the blog that the AALS does, make information available, right, about the way in, right, what you need to do. And schools need to work with their students. This is one of the things I do in Chicago, is I run a placement committee for our graduates, but we meet with them when they're in law school. So we're talking to that smaller percentage who actually think about it then and say, if you want to do this, these are the things you need to start doing in order to be in a position 5 or 6 years down the line. And the more schools that do that, frankly, the more candidates there will be. And Angela mentioned, of course, these well-known programs, I guess the CULT program, which was started at Duke and has now migrated with Guy to that school in near Boston, whose name I keep forgetting. And, programs like that, I think have been very successful. That's my impression. We often see candidates who were beneficiaries of that kind of mentoring, but individual schools can do it too. And I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Angela.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in the study is you asked, the question was asked about when did people start thinking about becoming a professor? And I think that the last point that Brian highlighted is really, really critical, is that a lot more people are thinking about becoming professors even when they're in law school, have made that decision that they want to become a professor in law school compared, and the study showed a generational shift, right? And so I think that really, really highlights the importance of getting information to people when they are students, but not just getting information to people about what it means to be a faculty member, but giving people the notion that it's a realistic possibility for them. I can't tell you how many people I talk to say, oh gosh, I'd love to be a law professor, but I just don't think it's accessible to me, which is why I think it was so important. And Melanie pointed out some of the data that she pointed out during her parts. But I think it's also important for us to know as faculty, because we're the ones who encourage students to think about becoming professors and to broaden our view about what are the talents that we see in students that would make them exceptional faculty. I think I talk to so many women of color, for example, who say, well, I'm accidental law professor, I'm accidental dean. And one of the factor that influenced them the most to pursue that pathway is because somebody said you should think about doing it. It's my own story. I became a faculty member because somebody told me I should think about becoming a faculty member. I became a dean because people were telling me I should think about becoming a dean. And sometimes people we might take for granted don't see the things in themselves that others see in them. And so it's really, really important for us as faculty who our students really admire to make sure we're the ones encouraging them to do that, encouraging them to apply for clerkships, encouraging them to think about becoming faculty. And then I think as Brian highlighted, it's really, really important for us to have a lot of the programs that are giving people access to information, because so much of being successful and getting into the academy is simply having access to information. Like, how do you even talk? How do you respond to questions? What does it look like? What does a day look like? There's just so much that I think your typical person doesn't know unless they're really getting mentored through the process.
And I'll jump in something you said earlier, Angela, and that is their gender differences, the racial differences, even in whether people, the data showed, whether people are thinking about it before they graduate or whether they're thinking about it after they graduate. And it's also, of course, consistent with your point that somebody needs to talk to them about it. And oftentimes those conversations happen differently depending on your identities. Other questions, Kelly, from the audience? Or I always have questions, but
Yes, Melanie, I think one of the things would be helpful, I'm going to ask Katie to come on if I could for a minute, because there's a lot of questions about how people can find on our website the study, and just she might share for the benefit of the whole. We've responded to a few questions, but just how the trove of underlying data relates to future topics for research, and how people can think about this as the start of understanding more fully about the Legal Academy. So Katie, could you hit those for us as we make sure the audience have what they need to go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking at the chat too, and so many wonderful questions and responses. So thank you to all our attendees for kind of keeping that vibrant conversation going in the chat. So yes, we will be putting up, when we're just concluding our session today, a link to our website. The full report will be available for purchase there. Should be pretty immediately after we conclude today. We got to give our web team a little time to upload it there, but it's ready, and you can access it there. We'll also have a highlights document available if you want to get more detail but aren't ready to look at the full report. And I think, some of the questions that have come up are giving us ideas for more research, but also are things that we know can sort of branch off of this. One is on intersectional analysis. I'm not sure if anyone got back to that question I saw came through in the chat. In this study, we did not do that type of thing. So we just looked at, race, ethnicity, gender, and we didn't do that intersectional analysis. For example, the question was about looking at experiences of women faculty of color. That is something that we want to do, and I think with the data set that this study generated, may be possible. And so I see the possibilities to do, more concentrated, maybe sort of subject specific studies with this survey data. So if you have other suggestions or questions in that way where you think there could be a good topic that does that second level of analysis, Kelly put our contact information in the chat there, and we'd love to talk with you about those ideas.
Katie, thank you for that. And I also want to note that ALS is also aware of and appreciative of the number of faculty who are working in this as an area of scholarship. Mira Deo is an example. There are many people who have done important studies of intersectionality issues, of other aspects. And so our goal is to help as a whole collect the broad set and to be useful as we're trying to get a full picture. But it takes a village, right? When we're looking at all the things we need to, and that's how scholarship should roll. I also want to note that our annual meeting coming up in San Francisco in 2025 in January is a wonderful opportunity to have more of these conversations. And there are many panels that are on these issues. For instance, some people have put things in the chat around academic support faculty, the changing demographics there, the changing status issues for legal writing, for clinicians, the need for people who have been in practice more to get more into the academy, but yet how sometimes that's difficult given the tracks. So there's many conversations on all that will be happening in many of our sections at the annual meeting and otherwise. But we give a shout out to all the researchers that focus on legal education, and our Journal of Legal Education is really thriving. And that's a wonderful place for people to continue to talk about legal education and to help it become the best it can be. So Melanie, with that, I want to go back to you for any questions you have and maybe wrap up comments from Brian and Angela. We've got about 8 minutes left, so time always flies when we're having fun.
Well, I've so appreciated the comments, and I can tell from the chat, I was able to scroll down as I had a minute there, and people really appreciate the comments and are delighted to hear more about the report. I wonder if there's any comment that, I feel like everything y'all have said has been really, really helpful. The one thing that we didn't talk a lot about, although Angela talked a little bit about, was the teaching versus scholarship. And I know that can vary. I wonder if you want to make some final comments and if you wanted to talk a little bit about the teaching versus scholarship versus what we saw is, and this was part of Angela's point, the service obligation tends to fall harder, at least as perceived by the respondents that answered, on women, on people of color, right? On so maybe y'all could talk a little bit about that as you wrap up.
So yeah, no, I think absolutely correct. I would say it was super interesting. Of course, the data revealed that that certainly if you were at one of the most selective schools, there were more resources for including teaching assistants, all those things for producing scholarship, more time, lower teaching loads, all of those things. And I would say that it really, of course, shapes people's ability to be productive, the amount of time that they're, in terms of scholarship, the coin of the realm, given the credits hours that they're teaching, the number of students that they're advising based on things like positionality, all of those things shape it. And of course, it's hard to produce scholarship without time and assistance. Those things shape people's careers as well. And so highly, highly important. I'm glad you raised it. There's interesting data there. What I would say is that the study is a really, really important study. I would say it's a beginning. It's the first of its kind by the AALS. And I think that people will have many more questions. And I'm looking forward to seeing other studies that the AALS does in this regard.
Thanks, Angela. Brian?
So we usually tell our students who are thinking about law teaching, I got this originally from my colleague Douglas Baird, who's a doctrinal bankruptcy guy. And he describes his job as one third, one third, one third. One third teaching, one third scholarship, one third, service, committee duties, and so on. And I think one of the reasons we tell students that, and this goes back to something that was Angela was touching on before, which is students don't entirely know what it is we do, and what their time is going to be like, right? Now, I was kind of interested that service, on average, put aside the special service, the non-formal service obligations that faculty acquire, especially I've heard this certainly from African American colleagues in particular, acquire for their students, for African American students at the school. But that on average, the service didn't seem to loom as large in what people spent time on. And there may, of course, be variation between schools. I think it's partly we're relatively small, so we end up having to do more service as it were. And the other thing it's hard to know is when you ask people for self-reports about what they consider most important, they can be a little bit influenced by what they think is the admirable answer. And again, I suspect there's variation by schools in this. In one way, I think teaching is the most important thing I do, since there are people who read my stuff, but at the end of the day, I teach students, right? I think even Justice Scalia said that once, that the most important thing is actually the teaching, and not the scholarship. But I think a lot of us feel the scholarship is really the most important thing, right? So it's hard for me to know how to interpret some of this data, and to go back to something that was touched on very early on. I mean, the response rate was 23%, which is not bad, right? Considering, as Angela pointed out, it was a long survey. But what we don't know is the characteristics of those who chose not to participate. I mean, we know something about their demographic characteristics, but we don't know, did the people who not participate, are they the people who don't like the AALS? Are they the people who are particularly lazy? I mean, we just don't know, right? And so we have to be a little bit cautious, I think, in the interpretation of some of that, self-reported data about what's most important and so on. So that's my cynical side speaking.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. Y'all have been delightful. Kelly, I want to turn it over to you to wrap us up and possibly get us on time.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And I want to just close by doing really 3 quick points. The first is that I want to be very transparent to everyone who's here that I see this as just the start of what ALS can do to be more helpful to the Legal Academy. I've been very excited by having the opportunity to take on this role because I believe in the common good. And I believe that we need the association, especially in all that we're dealing with in our world right now, to be a support to all faculty and staff and deans within our law schools. So I want you to know that my goal will be to help us become more relevant and indispensable, really, to all the work that you do and to help make your work easier. And to also understand that you're not all situated the same. Angela's comments very much helped bring this out, but we realize that within the academy, there's a lot of difference between schools and between faculty and staff within schools based on social demographics and many other factors. And so trying to understand the whole and to be helpful on all counts is what we'll be trying to do. And to do that, we need to hear from you. And so we'll do that through surveys. We'll do that in many other ways, trying to listen so hard we're burning calories. So we just want to thank you all for engaging, because that's what we need. There is no us and them. This is all of us together. And we look forward to working with you in that spirit. I also want to let you all know that I'm sure you join me in thanking Katie and Judy for getting us started on this. This is a wonderful start. And wonderful starts mean they trigger in our minds the desire for more. And that's exactly what we want. And then I also want to say such a huge thanks to Melanie for chairing this and also for being our president, which is a volunteer role that takes a lot of time. and to Angela and Brian for great comments today, but more than anything for being such awesome models of law faculty and for their leadership for so many years on so many fronts. So with that, we'll close on time, right on the hour. And I want to thank you all for being with the Association of American Law Schools for this study of law faculty. We look forward to working together. Wish you all a good Thanksgiving and to be well and to keep working hard together to make legal education excellent. Thank you.